Okay, so today's lesson is about life cycles. The topic is about reproduction, and today's lesson is about the actual cycle of life. So the definition of reproduction is that two adults, or in some case one adult is sufficient, they mate and you get new individuals. So the whole purpose of reproduction is to form new individuals that will basically take your place. So in terms of the cycle, what does a cycle mean? Think of it like the water cycle, where you've got evaporation, condensation, precipitation, runoff, and it comes back. So you start from some place and it keeps coming back to that same place after you go through the entire cycle. In the case of humans, we start off from the zygotes, which is a combination between the sperm and the egg. They combine and it gives you this zygote, the first cell that you ever made from. Half of the DNA from your mum, half of the DNA from your dad. Then you grow up, you become a fetus, an embryo, you're born, you become a toddler, you become a child, you grow up, you're a teenager, you're an adult, you mate, you reproduce, and you have your own child. And then they grow up and you become elderly and you start to reverse in your growth and development, which is the next two terms that I want to talk about. Growth means when you're actually growing larger. So development does not necessarily mean you have to grow. For example, humans stop growing at around 19 or 21 years old. Does this mean that we stop developing? Absolutely not. Our minds, for example, we can continue developing our minds, not growing. Our head doesn't grow, otherwise, it'd be very hard to balance. Our minds, for example, keep developing even after we stop growing. So that's the difference between growth and development. So you can stop growing if you're a grasshopper, you can stop growing in size, but your wings aren't fully developed. Then your wings can start to develop. It doesn't mean you have to grow if you're developing. The next definition is metamorphosis. Now, metamorphosis means you enter this phase and you come out as something different, almost like a different creature. So let's talk about the butterfly, for example, which is an insect. And that brings me to the insect life cycle. The life cycle of a butterfly starts as an egg. So the adult butterfly, the female adult butterfly, would come, and the best place to lay an egg is such that when the egg hatches, it's got immediate food. So what do caterpillars eat? Leaves. So the best thing to do for an adult butterfly is to lay its egg directly on the leaf, so that when the larva, which is a caterpillar, which is a child butterfly basically, when that hatches out of the egg, it's immediately got food. It's going to start eating the leaf. And as it eats, it starts to grow. And after a while, it's become a fully developed caterpillar and it enters this stage called the pupa. Now the pupa is when it enters like this little shell and it stays there for a while. Inside, stuff are happening, you can't see it, but it's starting to develop wings. It's not necessarily growing, but it's developing wings. It's becoming something different. And it hatches and it becomes a butterfly, like almost a totally new creature. So that butterfly, that caterpillar, undergoes metamorphosis and it becomes a butterfly. But in the case of a grasshopper, it's still an insect, but it undergoes incomplete metamorphosis, which means it doesn't go through a pupa phase. It doesn't stay in this little phase to become something different. A grasshopper starts off as an egg. It becomes a nymph. Nymph just means child caterpillar. Child grasshopper. Child caterpillar is larva. Child grasshopper is nymph. So the grasshopper hatches from the egg. It becomes a nymph. And it starts to grow and it becomes an adult. And it becomes an adult grasshopper. It develops wings and then it can actually go off and mate with another grasshopper to lay its own eggs. So that's the difference between insect, butterfly and grasshopper. Grasshopper undergoes incomplete metamorphosis. Butterfly undergoes total metamorphosis. In the case of a frog, it's still another 4-stage cycle. You start off as an egg. That egg becomes a tadpole, which is basically a child frog. It's a tadpole. So the egg hatches, it becomes a tadpole. That tadpole grows into a frog. When it's an adult frog, it can then mate with another frog and lay its own eggs. So it comes back to the egg again. It keeps coming back. The plant is also very similar, but instead of an egg, it starts off as a seed. That seed grows into a young plant, which is just a child plant. That young plant grows into a large tree, and it has flowers. So when the pollen from one flower, the pollen is like, imagine the pollen on a tree to be like the sperm of a tree, basically. That pollen has to leave that flower and travel to another flower and go into the female part of that flower. This is called cross-pollination. Pollination basically means reproduction, but in plant terms. So cross-pollination. Or, the interesting part is, the pollen on the flower can actually go into the female part of the own flower. So you don't actually need two flowers to have to form a seed to have children if you're a tree, to get your seed to the offspring. So once you've self-pollinated or cross-pollinated, you get a seed, and that seed, if it lands into the ground, if it's nurtured with water and sunshine, you get a young plant again. Same cycle. So these are the life cycles we spoke about. We spoke about the difference between growth and development. Spoke about what a metamorphosis actually means. And in the case of butterfly, it's the pupa phase. In the case of grasshopper, it doesn't actually happen. It's incomplete metamorphosis. Insect life cycle, tick. Frog life cycle, tick. And plant life cycle, tick.